except when I arrived at his office, breathless from running and ready to offer any bribe necessary to get a quarantine order for Esther. His nurse informed me that he was on a visit on behalf of the occupiers. The word caught my attention. A Nazi-friendly office would never refer to them that way. I didn't know if she was speaking for herself or if that was also the way the doctor thought of the soldiers. But it gave me a glimmer of hope. Was there any chance he'd find a way to get Esther out? I couldn't risk asking, but it didn't matter anyway, because the nurse informed me that the doctor wasn't expected back in the office for several hours, when it would be too late for Esther. I thanked the nurse and retraced my steps back to the Gestapo building the young soldier had pointed out to me. It was right on the road, which ordinarily would have allowed me to study it from the window of a small cafe across the square, except that as the day wore on, more and more military vehicles parked between us. If I had a grenade, I could make a quick work of many of those soldiers, but I doubted I'd actually use it. Not if it endangered any of the prisoners inside, or Esther in the back. After another hour of watching, a man exited the building with a doctor's bag. I immediately left the cafe and hurried to catch up with him. "Doctor!" He turned, wearing a courteous smile, grandfatherly wrinkles, and eyes that struck me as sincere. "Yes?" I'd rehearsed in my mind what I was going to say, but now that I was looking at him, the larger lies vanished. Instead, I said, "There's a prisoner inside. A girl I know. I think she's out back." His expression softened. "A friend. What can I do for her?" He sighed. "I'm afraid there's nothing any of us can do for her, or for any of the people caught up in these atrocities." I wrapped her wrist. "Why?" "It looks fractured, but I can't be sure." And I told them that while she has some sort of illness, it's not typhus, and that I'd return tomorrow to check on her. My hope is that it will buy her some time, but that's all I can do. Frankly, if they leave her outside tonight, by morning she'll truly will be sick or dead from exposure. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, unsteady and unsure of what to do. Desperate and quickly running out of time, I had to risk more than I usually ever would. "There must be a reason to quarantine her, sir. Any reason." He shook his head. "I'd need evidence." "Then find evidence. Please, fake it if you have to." He started to walk away, but I touched his arm. "I'll pay you, sir. Whatever amount you asked." He stopped, his expression full of sympathy, but his tone was uncompromising. "What happens to me when they discover the truth? I'm sorry for what happened to your friend, but take my advice and stay out of it, or I'll be treating you in there next." I quietly thanked him and returned to the cafe. My hope was to be alone with my thoughts there, but instead the cafe was beginning to fill with soldiers who were off duty after a change in shift. I sat among them, ignoring their flirtatious calls to join their table, and trying to keep my emotions in check. Was the man who broke Esther's wrist in here? Because none of these soldiers seemed to feel any guilt for having done such a cruel thing. Instead, they reclined in their chairs, laughing as they tossed around a pack of matches for everyone to light up their cigarettes. The pack eventually fell onto the floor near me. It looked empty, but I'd been keeping count. If they started with a full pack, there were 2 matches left. I put my foot over it, then pretended to drop my gloves. When I picked them up, the matchbook came with it, and I left. My cup of coffee also disappeared with me, but I hoped the cafe owner wouldn't notice my theft. Once I was alone again, I checked the matchbook and rolled my eyes. My counting was off by 1. Only a single match remained. I'd have to put it to good use, testing a theory I'd overheard Jacob and Reuben discussing months ago in planning for one of our raids. 3 jeeps and 2 trucks were parked in a line on the road between the town square and the Gestapo building. Soon there would be fewer of them. I had one last purchase to make, a small kitchen knife from a market in the minutes before it closed for curfew. And as I walked back, I noticed a bicycle casually left in the front of an apartment. I stared at it a moment, wondering whose it was. Did a mother use it to get to work each day, her only way to feed her family? Was it a schoolboy's, one of the lucky few who still be getting an education? Or did it belong to a Nazi sympathizer? Did its owner laugh when he heard rumors of what happened to my people? Or was he the kind to hide someone in his home? Whoever he was, he had just donated this bicycle to the cause of the resistance. May God bless him for his generosity, however unintended. Then I waited until dark, until the streets were quiet, until my heart was about to burst with worry. 2 soldiers patrolled the front of the Gestapo building, but I was already in place beneath one of the trucks. I nicked the fuel line, though not much, because I didn't want them to hear the gas dripping into the coffee cup. When it was full, I scooted out from beneath the truck, leaving a small trail of gasoline behind the thinnest line I could manage with my cold, nearly numb hands. That got me as far as the second truck, farther than the Gestapo station, where I repeated the same action until I was at the jeep with a full cup of fuel. I had to leave the relative safety of the vehicle then, and the same moon that I was grateful for last night now offered more light than I wished it did. I kept to a low crouch and moved slowly, though I had to watch for the soldiers, so my thin line of fuel was getting poured out too fast. It'd run out long before I was far enough away from them. I'd have to move quickly. When the last of the fuel was gone, I pulled out the matchbook. The slight breeze in the air was another problem. I had hoped to light the match and toss it down, but now I had to get close to the gas with the flame. This was incredibly foolish, impossibly dangerous. I could just as easily blow myself up. Using my body to guard against the wind, I lit the match and immediately used it to light the book itself. As soon as the cardboard shell was burning, I threw it onto the fuel. Everything happened in mere seconds. The line flared up, then traveled like lightning to the truck, where the fuel had been collecting. It immediately ignited, a booming fire that popped the truck's hood open and set the engine aflame. Heat rushed back at me just as quickly, fierce enough to be felt even with my arms in front of my face. The line of fire continued almost instantly to the second and third trucks, where the fuel had been collecting the longest. The last truck exploded into the air with a booming sound that would be heard for kilometers around. I didn't see it land because the explosion knocked me to the ground, and I immediately launched back onto my feet, racing away from the crime scene. I tried keeping my body directly in line with the flames, which I hoped would prevent the soldiers from seeing me. But it probably wasn't necessary. The entire square was in commotion with soldiers and civilians rushing from their shops and buildings, bumping into one another in their rush to get away from whatever happened next. I reached an alleyway near the cafe and followed it to a street that I'd already explored earlier. I knew the route to the back of the Gestapo building, a high fenced yard where I hoped Esther was still being kept. Soldiers were shouting and a siren was going off in the town, which helped me more than the Nazis could ever have known. Moreover, I heard a second explosion. The fire must be spreading. Good. I was prepared for the tall brick fence back here, too. A tree on this side had long tentacle-like branches that would carry me into the yard. I scaled up the trunk and shimmied out across one of the thick lower branches, momentarily reminded of Esther's story about the tree in the schoolyard. Then I saw her, and my heart sank. Esther hadn't noticed me yet, though I certainly took in her disheveled appearance, the dark bruise on one side of her face, her bandaged wrist, how very small she looked against the tree. Her attention was focused on the wailing sirens and shouting soldiers. A third explosion went off in the streets, giving me a great amount of satisfaction. I hadn't expected the plan to work so well. Perhaps the trucks contained some fire-sensitive equipment. When I dropped into the yard and called Esther's name, she jumped and shook her head in disapproval. "Shia, did you do that?" Both arms were tied around the tree trunk, which must have caused her wrist incredible pain. Up close I noticed the bruise was even worse than it appeared from a distance. There was a cut on her cheek, too, and other small bruises on her neck, and probably elsewhere that I couldn't see. Without a word, I used my knife to cut through the ropes, and then led her by her good hand back towards the wall. "We can't climb this." She held out her wrist. "I can't. I'm going to push you to the top, and then you've got to help me to get up, too." She started to protest, but I added, "You've got to do this, Esther. I don't care if it hurts." I did care, but that couldn't be an excuse. Not now. It wouldn't be long before a soldier was sent to check on the prisoners, including the one left outside to freeze in the winter air. I clasped my fingers together to boost her up. Then she grabbed onto the top of the brick wall with her good hand and gasped in pain as she braced herself with her injured arm. "I can't, Shia." I'd already climbed as high as I could on my own, but I lifted my hand to hers. "Take it." I wasn't offering sympathy now, or even mercy. "Now, Esther." She squirmed around until the weight of her body kept her balanced on top of the wall and propped her wrapped arm in front of the brick. Then she reached down with her good hand and took mine. She wasn't strong enough to lift me, and I worried that I'd pull her down instead. But she was pressing into the wall with her injured arm, although I heard her stifled yelp of pain as she did. I climbed as fast as I could, skinning my elbows on the brick as I dug in to find every possible grip with my other hand. Then I reached the top of the wall and hoisted myself over. As soon as I let go of her, she let go of the wall and fell to the ground. "Esther!" I jumped down and found her on her back, clutching her injured arm against her chest. The bandage on her wrist had become twisted and was probably useless now. Wrapping my arms around her, I pulled her to her feet and led her down a side street. That was where I'd left the bike. It wouldn't be a comfortable ride, but she could sit on the handlebars, keeping her balance with her good hand if I drove carefully. Unfortunately, careful driving was not the priority. I needed to go fast, regardless of the pain it caused her. "I'm truly sorry," I whispered, and then we were off. I pretended not to hear her gasps or pleas for me to slow down, and only pedaled faster. I had to.